Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You know, January 1st might seem far off, but it'll be here before you know it.
Yeah.
And with all the talk about SSI benefit changes coming in 2025,
Right.
we wanted to take a look at what you can expect.
Definitely.
You've sent us a ton of articles about SSI, COLA, and even the Federal Reserve, so
It's a lot.
yeah, so let's dive in and uncover those key takeaways.
You got it. There's a lot to unpack here, but by connecting the dots between these different sources,
Right.
we can get a clearer picture of how these changes might impact your wallet in 2025 and beyond.
Okay, so let's start with the big one.
Yeah.
COLA. I see that word everywhere.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean for your benefit amount come January 1st?
COLA stands for Cost of Living Adjustment.
Oh.
And it's how the Social Security Administration makes sure your benefits keep pace with inflation.
Okay.
Think of it like this. A loaf of bread costs a lot more this year than it did a few years ago, right?
Right.
Well, CLA is designed to help your benefits cover those rising costs so your purchasing power stays as strong as possible.
That makes sense. So it's not just about getting a raise, it's about making sure your money goes as far as it did before, despite prices going up on everything.
Exactly. Now, we won't get the official 2025 COLA announcement until October 10th,
Right.
but analysts are predicting an increase of around 2.5%.
2.5%. Now, I know we're still a few weeks away from the official announcement,
Right.
but based on this prediction, what could that actually look like for someone receiving SSI?
Well, a 2.5% COLA increase would translate to roughly an extra $48 per month. That would bring the average monthly SSI benefit to around $1,966.
Okay, so an extra 48 to go every month. While maybe not as big of a jump as we saw in 2023 with that 8.7% increase, still makes a difference when every dollar counts.
Absolutely. And a smaller TOLA increase isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
It actually suggests that inflation might be cooling down a bit after the economic roller coaster we've all been on.
That's a good point. It's like we've been on this wild ride.
Yeah.
And, things are starting to level out a bit, thankfully.
Hopefully.
But before we breathe a sigh of relief, I'm curious,
Yeah.
how is this KOA even calculated? These articles keep mentioning something called CPIW,
Right.
and frankly, it sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. CPIW stands for the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers.
Okay.
It's basically a way of measuring how much the price of everyday goods and services has changed over time.
So it's like they're tracking the price of that loaf of bread we talked about earlier, along with other essentials, to see how much more, or hopefully less, we're all paying.
Exactly. They look at things like groceries, gas, rent, utilities, even haircuts.
Wow.
They track all of these different expenses that impact our daily lives and use that data to calculate the CPIW.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
So based on how much those prices have gone up or down, they determine how much of a bump SSI benefits need to cover those costs.
Right.
But, even though the articles are calling this predicted 2.5% increase modest.
Yeah, and it's essential to remember that this is on top of several years of significant increases.
Right. It's not like we're starting from scratch here.
Exactly.
We're talking about a cumulative increase of 23.4% since 2020. So even if the 2025 adjustment might be smaller, it's still building on those previous gains.
Now, that's a crucial detail. It's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture when you're laser focused on just 1 year at a time.
Absolutely. It's all about perspective.
Now, besides the COA increase, some other significant changes are coming down the line in 2025 that caught my eye in these articles.
Okay.
These could directly impact how much money people see in their bank accounts. Ready to dig into those?
Absolutely. There are two key changes on the horizon you'll want to be aware of.
Okay.
Adjustments to the earnings test limit and the maximum Social Security benefit. Let's break those down.
Okay, so first, the earnings test limit. That one sounds a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean for people receiving SSI?
It's actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The earnings test limit basically dictates how much you can earn from working without it affecting your SSI benefits.
Okay.
So if you're someone who receives SSI but is also working,
Right.
this is something you'll want to pay close attention to.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of people rely on SSI to supplement their income,
Right.
especially with the rising cost of living these days. So what's changing with this earnings limit in 2025?
The good news is that the earnings limit is expected to increase.
Okay.
This means you'll have the potential to earn a little more from your job without seeing a reduction in your SSI benefits. It's all about finding that balance between work and the support you need.
That's fantastic news, especially with so many people working well into their later years. This change could provide some much-needed flexibility and financial breathing room.
Okay, so we've got the earnings test limit. What about that other change, the maximum Social Security benefit? What's happening with that one?
So, similar to the earnings limit, there's also a cap on the maximum amount of Social Security benefits you can receive each month.
Okay.
And the projections for 2025 show that this maximum benefit amount is also expected to increase.
Okay, so both of these changes sound like good news for people receiving SSI.
Yeah.
But are these increases going to impact everyone equally? Or are there certain groups who will benefit more than others?
That's a great question. While any increase can be helpful,
Right.
the impact of this particular change to the maximum benefit will depend on your pre-retirement earnings.
Okay. If you had a higher income before retirement,
Right.
you're more likely to be affected by this maximum benefit cap than someone who had lower earnings.
So someone who had a higher income earlier in life,
Right.
if they're now receiving SSI, they might hit that maximum benefit ceiling and not see the full increase.
Exactly.
Okay.
But for those whose benefits fall below the current maximum, this change won't have as much of a direct impact.
Okay.
They'll primarily benefit from the CLA increase we discussed earlier.
That makes sense. It's like different pieces of a puzzle coming together to create a different picture for everyone.
Yeah.
So we've got the CLA increase, which impacts everyone.
Right.
And then these other changes to the earnings limit and maximum benefit, which will affect people a bit differently depending on their individual circumstances.
Precisely. It's all interconnected. But the bottom line is that the Social Security Administration is making adjustments to help ensure that SSI benefits continue to provide crucial support, especially in light of the economic shifts we've been experiencing.
Now, speaking of economic shifts,
Right.
I can't resist connecting the dots here.
Oh.
We've talked about SHIOA, earnings limits, maximum benefits,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another big player in this whole economic game, the Federal Reserve.
Right.
And, I noticed that some of the articles you sent mentioned some recent moves by the Fed.
Yeah.
What's the connection there? How did their actions tie back to what we've been discussing about SSI?
That's a great observation. It might seem like a bit of a leap, but the Federal Reserve's actions actually have a ripple effect that can be felt across the entire economy, including things like SSI benefits.
Okay, so the Federal Reserve, big picture stuff. But how does it actually trickle down to impact people's wallets?
Well, in a nutshell, the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, as it's often called, is like the conductor of the U.S. economy.
Okay.
They're responsible for setting interest rates and managing the money supply, all in an effort to keep inflation in check and promote economic growth. They're always trying to strike that delicate balance.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope sometimes with the economy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And recently, they made a significant move by cutting interest rates for the first time in 4 years.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. What's the significance of that move? What message are they trying to send?
It's a clear signal that they're prioritizing economic growth, even with the risk that inflation could potentially start to creep back up. By cutting interest rates, they're hoping to encourage borrowing and spending, which can stimulate the economy. But it's a calculated risk, because more spending can sometimes lead to higher prices.
It's like a balancing act, like you said. They're trying to keep all these different factors in check at the same time.
Exactly. And ultimately, their actions, while aimed at the broader economy, have the potential to impact your wallet in a variety of ways.
Okay, so we've got the Fed over here making these big moves, and at the same time, we've got these changes coming to SSI benefits. How does it all connect? What's the takeaway for our listeners? It's like trying to piece together a giant economic puzzle, right? So how does it all fit together?
Well, think of it this way. The Federal Reserve's move to cut interest rates suggests they're anticipating slower inflation in the coming months and years.
Which could mean what for CLA, those cost of living adjustments to SSI benefits?
It could mean that those CLA adjustments might be a bit smaller in the coming years, just like the analysts are predicting with that 2.5% projection for 2025.
Okay, that makes sense. But even if those adjustments are smaller, you're saying there's hope that prices in general won't skyrocket the way they have been recently.
Exactly. The Fed is essentially saying, we're seeing some potential relief on the horizon.
That's reassuring, especially for folks on fixed incomes who really feel those price increases. So much in the news can make your head spin if you're just trying to figure out how to make ends meet.
It absolutely can. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to understand the factors influencing these changes, both directly and indirectly.
We've covered a lot of ground here today, from COLA and CPIW to the Federal Reserve. Before we wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with today?
First, remember the January 1st deadline. That's when those COLA adjustments to your SSI benefits will take effect. Second, while we're still waiting on official word, a 2.5% increase is what many experts are predicting. And remember, even though it seems small, it's on top of several years of significant increases. Finally, keep in mind that other changes are happening too, like those adjustments to the earnings test limit and the maximum benefit amount. Those could have a direct impact on your own personal bottom line.
Those are some really important reminders. And I think you've highlighted something crucial here. This isn't just about numbers on a page. It's about understanding how those numbers translate to your everyday life, your financial well-being.
Precisely. And that's why I always recommend checking in with the Social Security Administration directly. They're the ultimate source for the most up-to-date and personalized information for your specific situation.
Great advice. Don't just rely on what you see on social media or hear through the grapevine. Go straight to the source.
Exactly. They're there to help you navigate all of this.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into SSI benefits, I want to leave our listener with a final thought. We spent a lot of time talking about the government's role in all of this, the Social Security Administration, the Federal Reserve, but I think it's important to remember that you have agency in this too. Stay informed, ask questions, and advocate for your own financial well-being. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of SSI benefits. Until next time, stay curious.